Hello and welcome to the 42nd episode. My name's Ryan Blake, I'm the founder and director of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode we're talking to Chloe Svolakos. Chloe is a licensed clinical social worker, otherwise known as a psychotherapist. We dive in and discuss lots of different things related to psychotherapy and how they particularly apply it to extreme sports, as well as asking all the normal questions we usually ask our guests. Just before we start, please don't forget to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on. It makes a huge difference and it really helps us out. Right, on with the show. Hi Chloe, welcome to the Extreme Sports Performance podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Please can you start by telling everyone who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Ryan. First of all, I just really want to say how excited I am. I've waited a long time to actually be on the show, and I am very grateful to be on here. So my name is Chloe Svolakos. I am a licensed clinical social worker, otherwise known as a psychotherapist or a therapist. I'm here to talk a little bit about sports psychology, what I do with my clinic, and how that bleeds into therapy for athletes, which is different than sports psychology.
Thank you for that. Please can you tell everyone how you've got to this position you're currently in? So where have you started out and what have you done up along the way until now?
Absolutely. Well, I have a wide background that influenced how I got to where I am today. Part of it is I have a dance background. I also have an athletic background, just growing up as well. But I was always interested, probably from junior high, which for those who call it something different, maybe middle school. But around the age of 11 or 12, I was always interested in psychology. And from there, I started reading books. And I was just really curious about the human mind. It wasn't up until college where I decided to get into a psychology background and start understanding a little bit more. But it was in forensic psychology. So I spent a lot of my early adult career working with crisis, with individuals who where psychology intersects with law. And I had seen a lot of people experience trauma from probably around the age of like 19 or 20. Um, and that wasn't exactly clear why I was at that point, it wasn't so clear why I was so interested and why I was so drawn. But what I recognized was I was able to hold space for people who really needed it at a critical moment in their life. And was young. And those years I had set aside I have a dance background. So I set aside 19 years of dance. I set aside, about 5 or 6 years of art, so I can focus on my schooling. And around 25, 26, I started getting that inclination to wanting to move more and, go back to a place where I was training a lot. Because when I was younger, I had been training. When I say training, I mean it was about 4 hours per class, sometimes in dance. And I wanted to move again, and I wanted to expel some of the stress that I was feeling from my academics. And I didn't really have a place to do that, and I didn't really want to go back to dance. But I also felt a lot of energy pent up. And essentially, I was having a conversation with a friend who was a amateur MMA fighter who suggested that I try jiu-jitsu. And that was really the beginning of me, I think, challenging a lot of social constructions and ideologies within myself. And I started having a space where I was having to introspect. I had to really understand myself, because I was stepping out of my comfort zone. It was much more athletic than I had ever really had the exposure to on a consistent basis. Martial arts is a very different thing. It also, like, as a woman, I felt challenged as well. I was in a male dominated space. Back in the day, jujitsu really wasn't very popular. And there were about, out of a 3-floor academy, there was three or four maybe women. And in my class, as a white belt back then, I had like two female friends. So, I really understood that as a person, I was being um I think my identity was put into question and it was starting to morph. And I didn't really have a lot of the awareness to understand what was happening, but I knew I was changing. And at the same time that I started jujitsu, I also was working as a domestic violence counselor and a leading nonprofit in New York. So I continued on with my experience working with survivors of trauma. I worked with um, a whole gamut of human experience, both men and women, adults who really came at a critical moment in their life, needing support and needing clarity. And for 2 years after that, 25 to about 27, that's when um, I try to juggle both of them. I tried juggling my martial arts practice, which then started turning into from some sort of hobby to a serious practice, one that I wouldn't necessarily say that I ever took it as a hobby. I don't think I ever have. I don't. It's not my personality, but or it wasn't back then, right? I was super intense, and I was regimented. But I started competing a lot more, and I started considering what it would be like for me to step outside of, using my degree and just training jujitsu and competing full time. It was my entire world. It was my life. Um, and I couldn't juggle both seeing clients and the caseload that was increasing at this nonprofit while also wanting to travel and compete as an athlete. I didn't know how to marry the two. And I was at a pretty interesting place in my life where I had to answer that question for myself. The only thing I can come up with was to, maybe give jujitsu a try. At that same time, a year into jujitsu, I had met someone who I'm still very good friends with today, and I have so much to thank him for introducing me to skydiving, which I laugh because I had no idea what skydiving was about. I didn't know that it was possible for us. I thought that you needed an engineering degree. I thought he worked for NASA. I had all these ridiculous ideas in my head. He obviously looked at me like I had, I was on drugs or something. But he invited me to come down to Florida from New York, and he was like, "Well, I'm a skydiver." And essentially, now I know he's a videographer, and he was coming from Greece to the main, we call them drop zones, right? Main drop zones across the states, to see if there was any potential for him to work and what would make sense for him. And as he invited me, I now had another door of this universe, another world open up. And I distinctly remember the feeling that I had of being so aware of myself and aware of the self that I wanted and the life that I wanted, and being in this place where I didn't exactly know how to get there. I didn't know how to make any of that work, because I had all of these years of schooling, all this dedication and true passion for helping other people, and I didn't really know how to do that as wanting to identify as an athlete. Interestingly, when several years prior, like 2 years prior, sorry, not several, when I started competing, a friend of mine was like, "Well, you're an athlete." What? No, I'm not. I didn't understand that that was something that I too could have. And I think, going fast forwarding a little bit, it's something that I see with my clients now, because it's the identity, it's the question of identity, like who are you and what are you, that I'm so interested in being able to hold space for someone to be able to answer that for themselves. Because I felt a, a visceral experience of needing to do that for myself. And I am a person who has a psychological background, a psychotherapeutic skill set, various psychotherapeutic skill sets. I'm capable of really helping people with some very complex uh, topics and needs. I feel confident in that. I do consider myself an athlete. I live in such a way that I feel that's true. I've had to come to that place to recognize what that means for me. I've had my, gender role and expectation, societal expectation put to the test and really put into question for myself. And I think I've come to a place where what I want to do with this clinic and what I have been doing is really allowing people to explore that for themselves. And it's trauma based, and I also have a quite the bit of experience of trauma myself, and I've done a lot of work over the years of my life, working with other professionals and processing, the things that I needed to process for myself. So, which I think is necessary for psychotherapists to do, regardless. They really have to understand themselves and be at a place where the the space and the tenderness and the compassion that they hold for somebody else, it's from a place after you've already really examined and analyzed and understood and met yourself. So that's how you can teach someone to do it too. So I just basically created a, a piece of me that's digestible and for someone to just take it and have it for themselves. And I want people to have that too, the way that I figured out how to give it to myself.
Fantastic. No, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for going into so much detail. I always love stories like that. So
Yeah.
what does a typical day, week, month look like for you now in terms of what you do and who you see and what kind of things that you cover with clients?
Sure. A typical week. Ryan, it's constantly changing, and it's gotten to the point that
Yeah.
I'm beside myself with how many things are that alta therapy can do and how many things I can do as a person, right? I mean, we're sitting here recording a podcast. There aren't that many social workers. I mean, there are for sure, but there aren't that many social workers who are, on podcasts and talking about the things that they're doing. So I am talking, I'm networking, I do a lot of my PR work. I do a lot of all my HR work. I do any, research and research development, any kind of marketing. I really sit down and I think about everything. It's a
Mhm.
business for me. The connecting with people, that's not a business, right? The interpersonal connection, I don't see as business. I see that as I just wholeheartedly could do that forever for my whole life. And I knew that from a young age. But the other end of that is filled with emails and phone calls and planning and creative processes that are so inspiring for me. I'm also working on an article series for a widely known skydiving magazine called Parachutist. Anyone who has a license with the USPA gets those sorry, not emails. They get their magazines on a monthly basis to their house. We all get them. Sometimes we get them in, they just pile up and there's so many of them, but they're really good for new jumpers. They're good for instructors. They're good for a whole bunch of different people that the articles there are tailored to a targeted audience that could, help people. They're thought-provoking articles. So I'm also working on, an article series for them. I am working on a website of my own that won't just be a website so you can, get connected. For sure, it's going to have that, but it's also a part of it will be almost like an encyclopedia, like an interactive encyclopedia to really understand some of the things that can happen to athletes or can happen to people who are enthusiasts in these extreme sports, alternative or adventure sports setting communities, and they're doing these kinds of activities. So I am constantly thinking about that. But on a weekly basis, I see anywhere from a slow week would be 25 clients. A pretty lofty week would be about 35 clients. I have seen 35 clients on a weekly basis consecutively last summer for about 3 or 4 months. It's a lot. But I'm also hiring people. So when I'm not meeting with people and I'm bonding with them and I'm connecting, or if I'm not doing some administrative or creative task, I'm also interviewing and I'm thinking about how to expand. So all the therapy is absolutely in a point of expansion that I thought I was going to reach in several years from now. But, when you try to open a door and you realize that it opens, then you have to be ready for it. So I'm just ready to start marketing Alta um, internet wise, right? I'm a dinosaur, so I don't really know how these work. I have help with people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, of course.
But a lot of it is just trying to get the word out that Alta is open, the doors are open.
Yeah.
And I'm licensed in what was 2 states, now is just about to be 4. So I'm licensed in New York, in Florida. I just finished all the paperwork for Colorado and Utah, which is where a lot of the base and climbing community is located. There's other spots in the US too. But yeah, and when I'm not doing any of that, I don't really watch a lot of movies. I try to, but for me, it makes a lot more sense to research. And I thoroughly enjoy like trying to find, documentaries or TED Talks or trying to find information or reading a lot of, evidence-based articles for extreme sports. There aren't that many, but there's a sufficient amount to start raising questions and get curious about what else and how much more we can start investigating and trying to ask and create needs assessments or connect with people to get more information, more data about what people's experiences are. So yeah, when I'm not actually helping people, I'm researching. And that's super true. My friends know that I'm literally working all the time. And I love it. And they're so weirded out by it because I absolutely love what I do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That's, again, really interesting, insightful answer. I can relate myself with what we do over here. It's non-stop all the time, and the actual coaching side of things is the fun bit. And there's a lot of behind the scenes planning, admin, and research that goes on as well, which again we never have enough time for. So you're not alone there. Just to give the listeners a little bit more of a better insight into the specific type of people you work with. So could you give us some examples of like maybe the sports they do or the challenges they have or the avatar that they would fit into?
Absolutely. I see anyone from the age of 18. I do have some clients that I started seeing at 16, 17. I do cut it off by like 16, 16 and a half. Just developmentally, I know that I can connect. And I don't necessarily feel that I have like adequate training to work. If ever there was a point that it was necessary, I would. But the athletes that I work with, the people, some some individuals identify as athletes.
Mhm.
A lot of individuals that do extreme sports or adventure sports or outdoor activities that are alternative um, won't identify as athletes. That's someone's right to, call themselves and or to figure out how they feel. So I'll just call them people, clients, because it's all different. But the people that I work with are all in some form of extreme sport or alternative athletic sport, an individual sport. Um, they can, I have a horseback rider that I also work with. That's alternative, I guess I would say as well. So I work with a lot of, there's weightlifting and CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting, gymnastics, dance. I do see a lot of clients that are also like dancers or they have a ballet background. And typically they come in with, very interested in, rekindling a relationship with their body, something that I truly understand. And they also are interested in speaking about, disordered eating, or if they actually have a diagnosed eating disorder, that we have space for that as well. But from the extreme sports end, it's anyone that typically who I do have currently are skydivers and base jumpers, and wingsuiters, right? So we umbrella term is skydiving and the umbrella term is base jumping, but there's also disciplines underneath that. And uh, they exist, they have a certain amount of risk, and there's an inherent risk that is true for all of them. But one of the riskier disciplines in skydiving is what we call swooping, which is also known as canopy piloting. And that's usually where someone is just focusing as a pilot and their relationship with their canopy. It's not really their body formation. A lot of us, I'm also a canopy pilot myself, and a lot of us, get out at a lower altitude because we don't really need the higher altitude. We don't really need that space because we're not focusing on, the positioning of our body. We're really focusing on piloting a canopy and getting better at that. We're coming in a lot faster, and the maneuvers are they're tricky because they require a lot of processes to happen at a split second time, right? And so what we're working with is trying to build awareness in a very tiny, quick window that is not always easy. And I can attest to that. It's not always easy to have a conversation with yourself in a moment where you're, aware of your ego, or you're aware of the anxiety, or you're aware of a fear or anything. Sometimes it comes off as, F it, I'm just going to do this thing and I'm going to push,
Mhm.
and the consequences are dire, right? It's a big deal. If you mess up in swooping, that can result in critical injury, serious injury, or a fatality, so we take it really seriously. But I do have some clients that the clients that I have now, although I am, I'm bound by confidentiality, but what I can say is, in all of the umbrella of, air-based sports, right? Like base jumping and skydiving, um, they're common uh, common topics, but also everyone's unique. But common topics that you will hear are, I survived an impact. And there's a difference between an impact and a strike. A strike is when someone is base jumping and they have a wingsuit, so they're wingsuit base jumping, and they impact, horizontally by flying into an object on a wingsuit. Um, the For swooping, we impact the ground and where people can, and it's coming back from injury, reconceptualizing, the sport, having flashbacks, having like a recurring reliving of that event over and over, which is very natural. I've experienced it as well. I absolutely understand what it's like to not be able to get an image out of your head.
Mhm.
I have experienced, breaking from jujitsu now. I've also like broken, my bones. I've had reconstructive surgeries, torn many ligaments, to the point where you also become desensitized, which is actually another area of for us to talk about, right? Like the kind of how used to injuries that we get, and then how used to these variables that we get, and how that causes us to not always really gauge when we need to, pull it back, and that kind of awareness that both becomes really useful and then also can be detrimental,
Mhm.
right? Because on one hand, you are acclimating, so therefore you're less likely to be in shock, or less likely to be reactive in a way that is not helpful for you. But then also you're very comfortable and understand that there's some risks, and you've been through so much that you can push, you do develop a habituation to the adrenaline, or to even cortisol, stress, to speed, like visually, your perception changes, it adapts. So because we're so adaptable, there's a trade-off, and there's pros and cons with it as well. There are some people that I work with, one person in particular that won't be able to skydive again, serious near fatal injuries that have a significant long lasting impact on this person and their livelihood, that they will live this way for for as long as we can, we can foresee. So it's a matter of, you know, defining the self and redefining and sharing the story, and then also like working with the narrative. I do a lot of narrative work with people that have experienced this kind of trauma. There are also people that, lose loved ones, they lose partners, they lose teammates, they people that you're working with on projects that you're consecutively like, consistently jumping with, and you build really close relationships, and also these very unique bonding moments that, you know, all one moment that they're there, and then the other moment you are observing them, strike an object, strike a wall. And that has its own host of complications and implications, right? Because, and then also there's resilience, right? So there's a lot. I think what I'm trying to get at is that it's not for me to say that extreme sports, alternative athletics are a bad thing, right? This is massively overly simplistic. This is not what I'm saying. And I don't actually believe that. What I'm saying is the conversations are so robust and so complicated that every single person's experience matters, at a very individualistic level. It's really important to know who the person actually was before they got into the sports, and then what their coping mechanisms are. There's also addiction, right? There's a lot of addiction in these sports because there's a big aspect is partying, is going out and drinking, and there's some recreational drug use, and that can also get out of hand, or it can become habitual. It could become, you know, uh, seen as medicinal. It can be seen as coping. It can be seen as a whole bunch of stuff that, it's where a person starts out wanting to do something for themselves that they believe will help them. And because they have all these underlining issues, or because a massive monkey wrench just gets thrown into their life, right? It kind of spirals and morphs into something different. And what I do with people, skydivers, free divers as well. I know I didn't mention that. Long distance runners, ultra marathon runners, actually. I'm Two of them are coming back to New York, so which is really cool. But like, as you're trying to engage in these sports that are supposed to bring you to a higher state where you're really proud of yourself and you're really feeling good about your life, all of the other things that can possibly happen, both empowering and also traumatizing, will happen because of this, right? I mean, it's inevitable. So what I do is I speak with people, in a way that is just encompasses the entire experience, and really celebrates the resilience that people have. I approach them from a strengths-based perspective. So we are always, always looking at their strengths. We are always looking at what they're capable of doing and how they got to where they're at. Because all of us, who have ever engaged in these kinds of sports, is because we believe in ourselves, or because we wanted more for ourselves, and we wanted to really experience that kind of exhilaration in a positive way. Nobody set out to get hurt or harmed, right? And then, life just happens. But as far as who I see, I have worked with a couple of wingsuiters. I'm actually working with a very special friend of mine who is a wingsuit coach, and she works with women in wingsuiting as well. There is the Women's Skydiving Network, two different things. So there's a lot of women's like in spaces now. This was not usually, this is not a thing. This is brand new, right? Over the past couple of years, we've all seen this sort of emergence of people kind of like creating space for themselves, which is wonderful. So I would be super lucky. With a little bit of luck, I'll be working a little bit more with them, and hopefully, women will feel comfortable to connect with me. But I also feel really comfortable connecting with men and connecting with all of their needs, because everyone experiences an emotional tenderness and has vulnerabilities.
We find that there's a big difference between the way that novice and experts approach training, and also a big difference between the way that men and women approach training. I think traditionally, society's kind of looks upon expert male athletes of being a
Hmm.
little bit more risky. But
Hmm.
do you find that that is the case? I mean, have you experienced any similarities or differences with people in that retrospect at all?
There are women who are alpine wingsuit base jumping while pregnant. Um, there are female canopy pilots who are toe to toe with males, right? I think in terms of the outcome of someone's consistent training and their dedication, outwardly, it looks like there are women who are taking up a lot of that space. And I talk about the word space because I think it's so important. But I do believe that when you speak to people on an individual level, they will share with you a lot of their experiences that are different than what they outwardly show, right? Or they'll speak to you on a deeper level and color their feelings a little bit more if if they choose to share that with you.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's completely impossible for a female athlete and a male athlete to empathize the exact same way and feel the exact same things when your body is changing past the age of 30, when you are thinking about maternity, when you are thinking about motherhood and spending time with your child or children, when you are thinking about maybe like the pressures of like maybe being a husband, right? And or when you're in this mountain and you know that you've taken like a 5 day hiatus to go and summit said mountain, and you get stuck for an extra 1 day, 2 days just because there's a snowstorm, and you're like, what the heck am I even doing? I have my family back home, right? That's very different. Also, the family oriented individual or the one who has an established family already, it's very different than the one who doesn't have those sentiments, right? We all have differences, I think, and I think it's really important to understand that there is both similarities and differences, and the only way you can understand the minutia, within the minutia, those specific, like I'm saying, differences, like you're asking, are to ask that one individual. Because I've met women who are like, I don't see the difference between me and a guy. I have a guy's brain. It's like, well, well, maybe, or maybe not, right? Tell me what that means to you. Like, what does that mean, right? You'd have to like go in there and dig and try to get what that person's trying to say. So I've heard a lot of different things. But to answer your first question, which is there a difference with the younger uh, entry level participants in sport and the ones who are operating at the competitive level? Absolutely, right?
Mhm.
This goes without saying. This is like the difference is so stark. But the amount of detail in order to answer this question is quite lengthy because on one hand, you have we have the accelerated free fall program, AFF, and that's when you're in student status. It's even before you have your first license. It's technically like your driver's permit. So you have like these student drivers, and they are full of fear. They're full of overwhelm. They're also full of excitement. Some of them are already have an idea of who they want to be and they all want to like wingsuit, and they'll tell you very, or some people are just like, I just want to jump out of an airplane. I really liked it and I want to try it, so even within them there's differences, right? In temperament and intention. But regardless of who that entry level student or entry level jumper is, they will never be able, I could never be able, you know, to account for what the future will hold and what they will experience and how they'll grow from it, right? They'll never be able to tell the future. So, because of that, they have a particular conceptualization of who they are and who they want to be. And that might come with a varied level of excitement or some kind of stylistic expression of excitement in their own right, right? But the competitor has seen so much They've been through so much, right? They it's not just in terms of skill and what they can actually do under a canopy or what they can do with their body positioning or how their endurance. If you know, I don't want to just like keep this as skydiving, right? Or base jumping, but I want to keep this to all kinds of athletes out there in these individual sports, right? But you have the advanced uh, intricate relationship with not being so shocked. There's a kind of reserve. There's an element, I believe, and maybe I'm projecting as well, but I think that I can speak on behalf of like maybe all of us, right? There is this kind of, and you know, maybe you can share too, Ryan, right? Like this kind of reserve that, you know, you're not so super excited all the time about everything because you've seen some stuff, right? Like you know that injuries can happen, you know that things can happen. Your body has taken a hit as well. Like mine, I had ACL reconstruction. I've broken my femur. Um, you know, probably four torn ligaments, cartilage from my rib like detached. I mean, stuff like this happens. And from the beginning, the first injury to the very last injury, right? Like the most recent injury is like my reaction isn't even the same. You know, I remember being told that I tore my ACL, and that was like I had to sit down. I started crying. It was the first time I'd never been stung by a bee, and I'd never broken anything. But here I am needing ACL reconstruction, and I've never been under the knife at all. And now I have to figure this out that like this
Yeah.
is happening to my body. That was terrifying,
Mhm.
right? And it doesn't matter how much trauma or how much like you know pain you've been through in other areas of your life. That's still new because that's still your body.
Mhm.
So you kind of develop these sorts of abilities. And even like every single time that I'll go and train, every single jump that I do, if I take like, you know, 5 jumps in one day, um, my experience from the first load to the last one is not the same, you know?
Sure. Again, that's so interesting. We often find that there's always a difference between novice and elite athletes we work with. Um, Not massive differences between male and female athletes either. But it really does depend on the sport, and it depends on the culture of that sport. And
Sure.
I think again, it's the experience that person has, because they could be a quite a young athlete who's had a lot of experience, or they could be quite an old athlete who's had not a lot of experience. So it's quite a complex puzzle,
Mhm.
and that's why we do lots of screening, assessing, testing, because we don't know all the answers, and we have to go through that cyclical process of assessing and prescribing, designing, reviewing all the time, because things change. And I think if you approach strength and conditioning, sports science, psychotherapy, all as a one size fits all, there might be some things which can help people, but it's definitely not going to be as effective as if it's individualized. Everyone's different.
Absolutely. But I will speak to the idea that there are enough women in the sport, in a male-dominated sport, that feel a particular way. And that actually translates into their performance. So for wingsuiters, for example, one thing that is, I think, already publicly spoken about from very well-known names and also like from women who are pretty skilled in what they do and they're just speaking on behalf of a group that feels, you know, that is consented to saying that they feel the same, is that you'll have a wingsuiter who like exits the airplane. This example is not it's not a secret, it's also like spoken about. But you know, she will exit the airplane and will try to catch up to a flock. And if that flock of people having already like, you know, got into their formation, into their slot, you know, maybe there's males or the energy is in a way that is competitive or is whatever's happening on the ground um, makes that person, that individual feel like she can't actually enter the group. That woman, that wingsuiter, that pilot will hang back And it's difficult for women to take up space, literally to take up space, and um, to fly into their slot at a point where they think that they've missed their that window. And it's really, that's just one example, I think.
Mhm.
But also the skydiving culture, or like the culture when you're on, the drop zone, and how you interact, how you hold yourself. Um, I can speak to many different topics. I don't think that this, um, I think that this can be opened up into a more sensitive and like open topic that takes a long time to really break down, to keep it respectful for those who have these feelings. I don't want to generalize and then just say one or two sentences, and because
Of
I
course.
understand that anyone who's listening is also going to be like, hey, but what about this or what about that? And
Yeah.
and they would be right, like we're talking about individual experience. But I think that there are some differences in terms of women uh, and in competition.
So, out of everything you've experienced in your world up to today, what would you say the most valuable thing is that you've learned with what you do and the people you work with? Again, a hard question, and I know
No, I
it's
got it.
it's difficult to generalize or maybe pick one thing, but does anything stand out to you?
Yeah, that I think we all got in this to feel really strong and
Mhm.
capable. And sometimes we want to mask our vulnerabilities, but I think everyone has a tender heart. And I think everyone gets scared. And I think everyone gets sad. And I think everyone has a need to not feel alone and to feel heard. Um, and not everyone knows how to ask for it. And most of us have gotten really good at what we do athletically or with sports because we can take all of our needs and our feelings and put them aside. And it's so incredibly special to see the real person that is inside this like extreme sports shell, right? This shield, or this one identity, right? That I think it's so important to recognize that, being an athlete or being an any one thing, being an accountant, I don't know, is not who you are essentially. Who you are is the inside of that. And when people come in, and they talk to me, it's it's handled with a lot of care and with a lot of respect for them. And it is delicate work, but it's also really careful work because I belong to this community as well. I'm part of it. And regardless, I mean, I can meet a mountaineer tomorrow. I can have someone who's an ice climber or whatever it is. The truth is that anyone doing any one of these things, we're all connected, and we kind of probably all have some friends in common, right? We're all sort of connected. Water sports, snow sports, ice, speed, all of these different things. It becomes less and less surprising. So what's really special for me is to be able to hold this private, super confidential, professional environment where you on one level know that you don't have to over explain yourself, or you don't have to, when you're actually in emotional need or a crisis or you're grieving, you do not have to explain what the background story is to someone who really won't ever get it, right? You don't have to explain what base jumping is. Right? A lot of people haven't even heard of it, right? A lot of psychotherapists, I mean, they have no idea. They can't fathom what that even looks like.
Mhm.
Or I mean, maybe now in recent times they can, but they don't get it, right? So it's not that I am speaking to anyone as a skydiver, or I'm speaking to them as someone who's like a martial artist or a this or a that. It's that I am speaking to a person with all of my different facets, right? I come to them as a therapist, so they should feel they're actually like speaking to a therapist, regardless if we have like 5 degrees of separation. And I might have some friends in common with them, but there's an entire very careful protocol that I've had to sit down and develop and figure out how can I keep my boundaries airtight and how can I keep my ethics on par with the vow that I made when I got my license or licenses every single time I get one, right? And and it's difficult. It's that's where the art or like the magic kind of happens because you have to be able to balance both. And I don't think that it's a very easy thing to do. You know, it shouldn't feel like, you know, me and you are just speaking on the drop zone, but it also shouldn't feel like you are having to work extra hard when you're already in pain enough to get the person to see you and understand you.
Brilliant answer. Thank you very much for sharing that. Again, coming back to what we spoke about earlier, it's very hard to generalize, and everyone is different. I think the bottom line for me is like we're all human. We're all people who happen to do these activities, rather than we're defined by people. We're being a person who does that activity. It happens. It's person first, activity second, really, from our side, and that's the approach that we tend to take with everyone we work with too. Chloe, just a few last questions just to finish off. I was just wondering if you could give us an example of one of your top performance exercises, drills, or practices that you might use more regularly than others, and how that might help people.
Sure. I get it, Ryan. You want to know all my secrets. I'll share one with you.
Okay, brilliant. One's good. We'll take one, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about neurochemistry for a little bit. And I will then also talk about different parts of the brain. So it's not just like talk therapy that I incorporate. I absolutely believe in using science and understanding how the brain works, especially when it comes to sports psychology, right? And performance. So with a lot of things that happen with us, right? When we become, you know, I know we've all heard of it, fight or flight, right? There's actually fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And these four different responses occur at a certain place in the brain. And whether that's, you know, could be the amygdala, for example. But when the brain is secreting these kinds of hormones, right, that are giving us and neurons are firing and it's giving us a message that we are under duress, we need to act very quickly, we are not okay. It could be from anxiety, it could be because we're triggered, or it could be because we have just had a major loss and we're scared. So the first thing I do is help someone develop a higher awareness of the tension that they hold in their body, the constriction that we feel when our nervousness bubbles up. So where does that sit in your body? It's really important to, and that's just one thing. This is a very lengthy kind of process because you're also gauging your emotions. So you're naming your emotions, you're naming your cognitions, your thoughts, and you're also trying to locate where in the body you're feeling that tension. When you can successfully get to the place where you can do this on any given basis, not just when you know the levee is about to break, so to speak, but when you can do this when you're just randomly checking in with yourself as a daily practice, it becomes a lot easier then to incorporate breathing. Of course, everyone says breathing, breath work. So breathing is very important. The breath is it depends on what kind of breathing you're doing that will help the brain respond in a corresponding manner, right? Knowing what kind of breathing you are doing, whether you're working with the inhale or the exhale, will help you figure out what parts of the brain you're either revving up or shutting down. So one thing I like to tell people is a longer exhale is going to shut down the sympathetic nervous system and bringing up that parasympathetic nervous system, the calming and comforting aspect of the brain that tells you like you're okay. If you are hyperventilating, for example, and I have some of my clients actually work with this, so we go back and forth between various breathing exercises, and we then also are observing how we are feeling after, like a pre and a post, every single time that we are doing a different type of breath or breathing, a different cadence. But it's really interesting because you can go from a hyperventilated state where the brain believes it's choking, or it's lacking an oxygen supply, or that oxygen supply is unpredictable. So for whatever reason, the brain is going to really think that you need to survive and you're not okay. I simulate this depending on who it is, because some people have a history of panic disorder or panic attacks, and that is not necessarily someone that you want to be running this exercise with. But for those who can do about 10 or 15 seconds of this particular breath under supervision, and for the purpose of like working with me in a therapeutic environment, so we're actually like breaking it down and we're talking about it, we then shift over to a longer exhale. So it's a stark difference between, you know, hyperventilating, I can't breathe, and all that entails, like your vision, your focus. Can you think? Can you see? We run like some kind of like visual test or something. So I'll run something through the screen. Like, did you see that? Like, no, I didn't freaking see that. It's too busy like hyperventilating for 15 seconds. Like, I didn't see anything. Then you have like a longer breath, and there's like a sense of sedation that actually happens. When do you use that? When should you not use that? What should you use when you're about to exit the door? This is actually what I work with my AFF younger people that are interested in kind of hearing this. People who are on the drop zone hearing my spiel. And we work with like, what kind of breath should you use when you're exiting the door? What kind of breath should you use when you are intaking material, you know, and new material? What kind of breathing should also instructors be helping people to use and to know? And how can I also look at people the way that they're breathing? So if you're holding your shoulders up like this, or if you're down like this, or if your back is like this, you know, you're leaning back, for those of us who are just listening. But if you are holding the tension and you don't know that you're holding tension, you won't know what kind of breath you're going to need. But a longer exhale to shut down that that fight or flight or fear response is really, really helpful.
Wow, that's really cool. How something so simple as breathing could be so complex under the surface, and how it can change people's state. I mean, I suppose things that were just going through mine then were decision making under pressure, under stress, and how important that is, especially in skydiving and related sports. Yeah. Split second decision making and being in the right state of mind. Thank you, Chloe, for sharing that with us. If you could leave the listeners with a piece of advice or a takeaway message that you think would be really valuable for them to hear, what would that be?
I would say that avoiding it is not sorting it. And the reason I'm saying that is I empathize and I understand why someone would get into extreme sports, alternative sports. I understand what they may have been looking for within themselves. And when we are faced with a lot of difficulty that we don't always feel we can share, just be aware of how performative our community can be, especially if you are sponsored, if you are a professional athlete, if you are an instructor, or if you are a mentor, if you hold any kind of great responsibility to other people to show up or to perform. I think it's really important to know that if you are feeling anything in terms of depression or anxiety, if there's any difficulty in your life, you are not the only one. And I think that there's a lot of people, especially recently, who are speaking up about this. And I think that it's just so important that we're all talking about it. And there is a space that is designed and has been dreamt up for a really long time now, specifically for you. That's what I would say.
Brilliant. Communication is ultimately key. We find that with absolutely everything we do. I find that personally with everything I do, whether it's, you know, work, in life, family, friends, communicating is where it all starts to connect. Chloe, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. I've really enjoyed our chat. Could you just let people know how they can get hold of you, find out more information, should they want to follow up?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much also for having me. This has been a real pleasure for me. And also, as I progress in developing this clinic, I think that this is also a core memory for me to be able to be on your show and then, take that and spread the word in other places as well. So this has been a very profound experience. So thanks.
Pleasure.
So to find me, I'm licensed in Florida, in New York, Colorado, Utah. You can go to Alta Therapy. That's ALTATHERAPY.org, altatherapy.org. That's the website. You can also request a consultation if you are interested in a 15-minute free chat. No cost whatsoever. You don't need insurance. You don't need anything just to be able to chat with me. But you can go on to Hello, HELLO, Alma, ALMA, helloalma.com. That is a search engine for all forms of therapy. So if it's not me, then I've just given, others, at least in the States, a resource to find for themselves. And, if that works, then that's great. But you can find me by just putting in my name, my first and my last name. There aren't that many Chloes. I think when they first started, it was like 2, and now there's 6, but you can find me just fine and I will respond. So altatherapy.org and helloalma.com.
Awesome. And social media channels?
Social media is Alta Therapy on Instagram as well as Facebook.
Brilliant. We'll put those links and addresses into the show notes so people can click on those directly. But yeah, thanks again, Chloe. It's been great chatting, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Likewise, you too, Ryan.
Thanks for listening to the 42nd episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. It would really help us out if you could please leave a rating and or review on whatever platform you're listening on. Be sure to check out our website, extremesportsperformance.com, that has details about our consultancy services, our in-person and online coaching, our in-person and online education, our in-person and online support, our media pages, our contact details, and how to subscribe for free to stay informed about company news and updates. Don't forget to join our growing community on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. Links to these can be found at the bottom of our website and via any search engine. Until next time, take care.